Okay, good morning. Everyone is here and we've received the message to get started. We'll call the case of United States versus Cara Bassett. My name is Judge Brandon Harper. Scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and please turn off your audio and your video. These should remain off until the trial ends. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means that the only people on the screen right now should be the two advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make their appearances?
Of course. Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Sonali Mehta, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Seva Castleberry.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Mr. Castleberry will be assisting me with the technology in today's trial as we represent the people of the United States of America.
Very good. Thank you. Defense?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Regina Campbell. Today, I will be joined at counsel table by my co-counsel, Mr. Henry Hopcraft.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Morning.
Together, we represent the defendant in today's trial, Ms. Cara Bassett.
Thank you both. Are there any preliminary matters? I'll start with the government.
Yes, Your Honor. First, one request related to the technology in today's trial. We'd just like to ask, for any reason, if you can't hear us or see us as we're speaking, just to interrupt and let us know there's an issue with the connection.
Will do. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to invoke Rule 615, calling for the constructive sequestration of witnesses. The government doesn't have a party representative in today's trial.
I assume there's no objection from the defense.
There is no objection, Your Honor, but we do want to note that the defense does have a party rep for this, or excuse me, that Ms. Bassett will be sitting at counsel table with us during the trial. Obviously, because of the Zoom format, we're not actually going to be able to see her during the trial, but she is here with us.
Okay, very good. That's granted. Rule 615 is invoked.
Finally, Your Honor, we would like to draw your attention to that pretrial order signed by Judge Foxteen. Specifically to number 7, it just states that exhibits 4 through 33 are pre-admitted and may be used at any time for any purpose. We do intend on referring to some of those exhibits throughout today's trial.
That's fine. Just remind the court so that the court and the jury remember. Just let us know.
Understood, Your Honor. With that, the government is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Very good. Anything from the defense?
None, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed.
Okay. We'll now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure that they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking, and the government may proceed with its opening statement when you are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. She planned, she poisoned, she profited. In August of 2017, the defendant, a woman named Cara Bassett, was tired of fighting with her husband. See, her husband, named Don Clark, was a wealthy businessman who owned multiple properties and businesses, including a zoo. The defendant wanted control over those businesses and properties, but her husband wouldn't give it to her. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. Learned that on August 18th, 2017, the defendant crept up next to her husband, stabbed him with a needle, and injected him with a deadly poison. In seconds, Mr. Clark was dead, and the defendant had control over his entire estate. See, members of the jury, that's why we've charged the defendant with murder. It's our job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally killed Mr. Clark. We're going to meet that burden today by showing you that the defendant planned for this crime. She poisoned her husband, and then she profited off of his death. I want to walk you through our case. Now, first, you'll learn how the defendant planned for this crime. See, today you're going to see a very important legal document. That's Mr. Clark's power of attorney. You'll learn that the defendant asked the family lawyer to include a very specific clause in that document. If Mr. Clark were to disappear, Ms. Bassett would gain control over everything. All those businesses and properties, his entire $8 million estate. Next, you'll hear how the defendant poisoned her husband. See, members of the jury, today you're going to learn about a dangerous chemical that was stored at the zoo where Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett lived and worked. You'll learn that this drug is so dangerous that just a few drops can kill a human being. See, the defendant had access to a box filled with vials and syringes and needles containing this poison. And when the police asked her, did you know that this drug is lethal for human beings? The defendant laughed. Finally, we'll show you what the defendant had to do so she could profit. See, members of the jury, the defendant knew that if she got caught, she would lose everything. So she took her husband's body, drove 100 miles away, and left it in a swamp. And then she waited. You'll learn that for an entire week while the defendant claimed her husband was missing, she didn't call him. She didn't text him to see where he was. She didn't call any family or friends. Members of the jury, you'll hear that the defendant almost got away with it. See, the police in this case were never able to recover Mr. Clark's body. But as FBI agent Steph Johnson will explain when he takes the stand, they found other evidence that the defendant left behind. Forensic evidence tying her to that swamp, GPS evidence showing us where she went that night, and phone records exposing her cover-up. Over the course of today's trial, the evidence will show that the defendant planned for this crime. She poisoned her husband, and then she profited, walking away with his entire estate. Plan, poison, profit. Those are the reasons that Mr. Clark isn't here with us today. Those are the reasons that at the end of this trial, I'm going to ask you to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Campbell, do you have an opening statement?
I do, Your Honor. It appears one of my cameras is flipped upside down. Moment to fix that real quick.
Certainly.
My apologies for that, Your Honor.
Okay, are you ready to proceed?
I am.
You may proceed.
May it please the court. When the government found someone to blame, they stopped looking. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine for a second that everything Miss Metha just told you is true. That the government's about to get up here and prove to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Cara Bassett killed her husband. What would you expect to see? Perhaps you'd expect to see an eyewitness. Someone who could take this stand and tell you that they know what happened the night that Don Clark disappeared. But when you listen to the government's case, you're not going to hear from a single one. Maybe you'd expect to see an autopsy report, a document showing you how and when Don Clark died. But when you listen to the government's case, you're going to learn that they didn't even find a body that proves that he was ever dead in the first place. And so surely, folks, you'd expect to hear about a thorough investigation, that the police looked into every lead, that they interviewed every suspect, that they examined every shred of evidence. But when you listen to the government's case, you're going to find they weren't looking for evidence. They were looking for someone to blame. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the individual the government decided to blame. This is Cara Bassett. She's a caring wife, an animal lover, and even a business owner right here in Florida. And she'll be the first to tell you that she's not a perfect person, and she certainly wasn't a perfect wife. But she is not her husband's killer. And when she walked through those courtroom doors, she was presumed innocent. Since the government wants to change that, they've assumed an enormous burden. A burden not to just give you someone to blame, but to give you the right person. A burden, ladies and gentlemen, to prove their case beyond all reasonable doubt. Folks, because they stopped looking, they're not going to be able to meet that burden. Now, as a defense in today's trial, we don't actually have a burden. We don't have to call a single witness. We don't have to give you any evidence. However, we are confident that Cara Bassett is not the one to blame. And so today in trial, we're going to ask you to do something the government did. Keep looking. Specifically, we're going to ask you to take a look at 3 things that the government didn't. 3 things that are going to cause you to doubt the government's case. 1, they're missing key evidence. Today, you're going to hear that the FBI investigated this case for a full year. But frankly, folks, they didn't really find much. In fact, you're about to sit through an hour-long murder trial without a murder weapon, without a dead body, and without any eyewitnesses who can explain to you why. 2, they didn't look into Cara Bassett's story. And Ms. Method just got up here and said, well, Miss Bassett didn't look for her husband at all when he went missing. As you listen to today's trial, you're going to learn that's not quite true. Miss Bassett told the police that when her husband went missing, she went looking for him. She went to bars. She went to casinos. She tried to find him. But what you're also going to learn is that the government did nothing to try to check on her story. They just didn't. 3, members of the jury, they're missing alternative suspects. Today, we're going to call a witness to the stand named Jo Kwong. She's a filmmaker here in Florida, and actually she was filming a documentary at the Don Clark residence for 2 years before he went missing. And she's going to tell you today that while she was at that residence, she knew of someone who wanted to hurt Don Clark, knew of a woman who had been harassing Don Clark, knew of a woman who said, I want to make sure Don Clark is wiped off the face of the earth. But ladies and gentlemen, that woman is not Cara Bassett. Ms. Huang's going to tell you that was a woman named Lisa. And you're going to learn that the FBI has no idea where Lisa was when Don Clark disappeared. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Method just got up here and told you plan. She told you poison. She told you profit. But what those 3 things really boil down to, folks, is this. The government thought that they could walk into this courtroom, point the finger at another person, and then look away. They can't look away from the facts. Facts, members of the jury. They're stubborn things. They can't be changed. They can't be avoided. And there's one fact in this case that is so stubborn that nothing the government says in trial today can change. When they found someone to blame, they stopped looking. That's why at the end of today's trial, I'm going to stand before you and I'm going to ask you to find the defendant not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. Before the government calls its first witness, I'd like to ask everyone to switch back into gallery view. That will allow you to see both the witness and the advocate at the same time. You can find the gallery view button on the upper right of your screen. Does the government have a witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Agent Johnson to the stand.
Okay, Agent Johnson.
Good morning, Agent. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Good morning.
Good morning. So I want to start by asking you just to introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Steph Johnson.
What do you do for a living, sir?
I'm an agent with the FBI.
Sir, were you involved in the case into the disappearance of Dawn Clark in 2017?
Yes, ma'am, I was. I led that investigation.
Well, could you tell us what that investigation resulted in?
Yes, ma'am. The investigation lasted for about a year. It ended in the arrest of the man's second wife, Cara Bassett, on charges of his murder.
Now, sir, I want to start at the beginning. What could you tell us about Dawn Clark's background?
Ma'am, he was 38 at the time that he died. He was married to his second wife, Cara Bassett. They owned a private zoo together. Before that, he was married to a woman named Lisa Clark. They had 2 kids.
Sir, what do you know about the defendant in today's case, Cara Bassett?
Ma'am, she was younger than her husband. She was less wealthy. She had a deep love of elephants, the animals in their zoo together.
Sir, did you speak with Miss Bassett in the course of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
So what did she tell you happened to her husband?
Ma'am, she claimed that her husband disappeared, that she woke up on August 19th, 2017, and he was gone.
Agent, I want to go ahead and start creating a timeline of events for what happened on August 18th and 19th. Mr. Castleberry, could we get that on the screen? So, sir, what time did the defendant tell you she last saw her husband?
Ma'am, she told us she'd last seen him at 9 p.m. on August 18th.
Did she tell you what she did on that night, August 18th?
Yes, ma'am. She said that she went to sleep and didn't see him after 9 p.m.
Agent, did you collect any evidence that was inconsistent with what the defendant told you?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And what was that evidence, sir?
Well, ma'am, we found evidence that someone left the property in a van, and then we found evidence that the defendant was driving that van that night.
So let's break that down, starting with evidence that a van left the property. How do you know that, sir?
We know that from reviewing GPS data from the van that we found that was registered to Dawn Clark.
Sir, if it's useful to you, can you pull up that GPS data in front of you? Your Honor, that's an exhibit that's already been admitted.
Very good.
Sure thing.
Now, Agent, could you tell us where that van went after leaving the property that night?
Yes, ma'am. That van left the property and drove 139 miles to Big Gum Swamp, a large marsh in northern Florida.
And what times did it make that drive?
Ma'am, it left the property at 11:17, and then it drove until 1:26 a.m. when it arrived at the swamp.
How long was the van stationary at the swamp?
For around 45 minutes, ma'am.
Based on those GPS records, where did it go next?
The GPS records show that after staying at the swamp for 45 minutes, the van left, drove to an airport near the zoo.
And sir, what times did the van make that drive?
Ma'am, it was from 2:10 a.m. to 4:29 a.m. in the morning.
Now, Agent, you told us you also found evidence to suggest that the person driving that van was the defendant. What was that evidence that you found?
Ma'am, that evidence has to do with mud that our forensics team took up at the swamp. We were able to test that mud. It turns out it has a very characteristic blend of rare algae. Then we were able to test that algae and see if it had any matches on other surfaces in today's case.
Objection, Your Honor. To the witness's characterization that the mud at the swamp had a unique combination of algae, we don't believe at this point Ms. Mehta has laid any foundation that this witness is an expert in forensics, in algae, in mud. At this point, him giving this testimony that it is, or about how algae works, well, it's outside of his expertise.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Please.
At this point, Agent Johnson isn't testifying about any specialized knowledge that he doesn't have. He's referring to the summary provided to him by the forensic team, like he testified. And Your Honor, that report is already in evidence, that forensic report. If Ms. Campbell wants to cross-examine him on what's written in the report and what he made of it in his investigation, she's welcome to. But at this point, he's not testifying beyond his knowledge.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
If the witness is saying, well, I looked at the forensic report and it told me this information, that would be one thing. Right now, the witness's answer was, this is how algae works, and that is not within the scope of his knowledge. So if he's going to be referring to a specific document, he needs to talk about what that document is, because he doesn't have the expertise on his own.
I tend to agree, but I also agree with the government that it's perfectly appropriate for this FBI witness to refer to a report that he reviewed. So the objection is sustained, but counsel, I'm sure you can rephrase the question.
Of course, Your Honor. So Agent, you were telling us about this forensic report. Could you just tell us how that forensic report aided your investigation without going into the scientific details?
Sure, ma'am. The forensic report told us that the mud from the swamp was found on the gas pedal of the van and then also on the defendant's boots.
All right, Agent. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about what happened after August 18th. Sir, did the defendant call the police on the 18th?
No, ma'am, not on the 18th.
Well, what about on the 19th?
No, ma'am.
Sir, when did the defendant call the police?
We got a report of a missing person a week later from the defendant, on the 25th.
Agent, what did the defendant tell you she believed happened to her husband in that week's time?
Ma'am, what the defendant told us was that her husband had gone missing. She claimed she spent that week looking for him.
Sir, did you find any evidence to contradict that story? Sir, what was that evidence?
We looked at her phone records.
So you mentioned her phone records. Did you find any evidence that the defendant called her husband in this week-long period?
No, ma'am. The phone records didn't indicate a single call placed to Don Clark from Cara Bassett.
Did she text her husband in these 9 days asking where he was or anything like that?
No, ma'am. That's not what the phone records showed.
Sir, did she call any family or friends looking for help with her husband?
No, ma'am. None of that appeared on the log.
Sir, I want to talk to you about whether or not you found evidence that the defendant had a motive in this case. Mr. Castleberry, could we put Exhibit 4 on the screen? Your Honor, again, this is one that's been pre-admitted.
Very good.
Sir, what is this letter?
This is a letter we received from Don Clark's attorney, Miss Tuminelli, and it was detailing what she knew about the circumstances surrounding his disappearance.
Now, Mr. Castleberry, I want to focus in on the section related to power of attorney. Sir, do you know what would happen to Mr. Clark's assets if he were to disappear?
According to Mr. Clark's attorney in this letter, if he were to die or disappear, his property, money, assets will be turned over to her second wife, Cara Bassett.
Sir, did the defendant tell you how much all of those assets are worth?
Yes, ma'am.
How much is that, sir?
Around $8 million.
Agent, do you know who asked for that clause about the disappearance to be included in the power of attorney document?
Ma'am, according to Miss Tuminelli, Mr. Clark's attorney, that disappearance clause was added because the defendant, Cara Bassett, insisted that it be included.
Objection, Your Honor, to misstates evidence. May I explain?
Please.
We're actually looking, because Ms. Mehta has it up on the screen here, we're looking at the information that Detective Johnson used to come to his conclusion. And what he just said is that Ms. Bassett insisted that this clause be added That's not what this document says. It says it was added at her sole discretion, but nothing about insistence. At this point, he's misstating evidence.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just testified that it was Ms. Bassett's insistence that it was included in the power of attorney document, that clause, excuse me. The attorney says, just like Ms. Campbell said, that it was included at Ms. Bassett's direction and no one else's. The witness didn't misstate the evidence, and the jury has it in front of them to read.
Sure, I get that, but did your witness say that it was because of her insistence, or did he say at her direction?
Your Honor, I believe he used the word insistence.
Okay, so the objection will be sustained to the extent the witness talked about insistence, and I'd ask the witness to stick to what the documents say, and to the extent that you're speaking about something else, just make sure it's something that's within your personal knowledge.
Yes, Your Honor.
And Your Honor, maybe strike that statement about insistence from the record at this point.
Yes, that's granted.
Agent, could you read that sentence for me, explaining why the clause is in the power of attorney document?
I included that clause solely at Ms. Bassett's direction.
Thank you, sir. Now, you told us what Ms. Bassett did both before and after the day her husband disappeared. I want to go back to the day of. Did you find anything on the Clarks or Bassett's property that could have been used as a murder weapon?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
What was that?
Found a missing vial of animal tranquilizer, carfentanil.
Agent, could you tell us what these two documents are on the screen?
Yes, ma'am. On the left, we're looking at a syringe of carfentanil. That's that animal tranquilizer. On the right, we're looking at information about that drug.
Well, based on this information, the data sheet, do you know if this drug is dangerous for human beings?
Yes, ma'am. According to the data sheet, the danger was grave. It's 5,000 times more toxic than heroin.
Well, sir, you mentioned that a vial of this drug went missing. How do you know that?
Ma'am, carfentanil is a Schedule II controlled substance. That means that it's required that the zoo keep records about where it goes and how much is used. Those records showed us that there was a missing vial.
Well, sir, how many was in the records?
The records reflected that there should have been 24 syringes of carfentanil in the stores.
How many did you find?
Only 23.
Agent, did you ask the defendant if she knew how dangerous this substance was?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
What did she say?
Ma'am, she just laughed.
Thank you, Agent, for your time today. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell, do you have a cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective, I want to begin by making sure I have your version of this story correct, okay?
Sure thing.
Sir, it's your theory that Cara Bassett drugged her husband,
Yes, ma'am.
that she picked him up and put him into a car,
That's right.
and then that she picked him up and threw him in a swamp. That's the theory here, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
Detective, I want to take a closer look at that theory. I'm looking for a number, sir. How tall is Cara Bassett?
Ma'am, I believe she's in the middle of 5'6", something like that.
She's actually 5'4", sir.
Yes, ma'am, that sounds right.
What about her husband, Don Clark? How tall is he?
Her husband's around 6'3".
He's actually 6'5", sir.
There we go. That's right, ma'am.
All right. So, sir, just so I'm clear, you're telling the members of this jury that a 5'4" woman picked up a grown man who was a foot larger than her and put him in a car.
Well, that's right, ma'am. We also found a wheelchair that was consistent with the mud that was used in the swamp.
Okay, hold up, back up, detective. You say you found a wheelchair that was important.
Objection, Your Honor. Just as a point of order, I would ask that Ms. Campbell doesn't cut off the witness as he's explaining.
That's fine. I'm not sure that she did, but I'll instruct both counsel to let the witness finish their answer.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, detective, let me make sure I have this clear. You're saying that a wheelchair was involved in this case?
Yes, ma'am. We were mindful of their heights and sizes, and we tested forensic samples from a wheelchair found at the park. And that wheelchair revealed it also had mud from the swamp.
Okay, so there's a wheelchair in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, you just went through a direct examination with government's counsel, Ms. Metha, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
You didn't say anything about this wheelchair until just now, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
Now, sir, let's go back to your theory of this case. So now we have a wheelchair. So you're saying that Ms. Bassett picked up her husband and put him in a wheelchair.
Yes, ma'am.
She wheeled him to a car.
That's right, ma'am.
She picked him up and put him in a car,
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
and then she put him in a swamp.
That's correct.
So you're saying that a 5-foot woman was able to pick up a grown man who was a foot taller than her. That's the theory?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's talk about the investigation that led you to that theory. You were telling us on direct examination that you think that the murder weapon in this trial was a syringe, right?
That's correct.
You even showed the members of the jury a picture of a syringe.
That's correct, ma'am.
But to be clear, sir, the picture that you just showed the jury, that's not the murder weapon in this case.
No, ma'am. We were not able to locate the syringe that was used in this case.
That's exactly right, detective. You actually didn't find the murder weapon in this case.
That's correct, ma'am.
And since you didn't find the murder weapon, you obviously don't have any DNA or fingerprints tying Miss Bassett to the murder weapon, do you?
No, ma'am. Like I said, we were not able to locate that syringe.
So no fingerprints tying Miss Bassett to the murder weapon?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay, now you also told us that you think Mr. Clark's body is in a swamp, right?
That's right.
During the course of your investigation, you went to the swamp.
That's correct.
You brought your whole team.
That's correct.
You brought the Florida police.
That's right, ma'am.
You brought hound dogs who had the scent of Don Clark on their nose.
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Detective, you didn't find the body.
No, ma'am, we didn't. The swamp was frankly enormous and full of alligators. Made it very difficult to search.
So you didn't find a body because it was hard to.
Sorry, ma'am?
You didn't find a body because it was too hard to look,
No, ma'am, we looked as hard as we can.
but you didn't find it.
That's correct.
All right, sir, so no murder weapon, no body. You certainly interviewed witnesses in this case, right?
That's correct.
In fact, you interviewed every person who you think might know what happened to Don Clark. True?
Yes, we did.
How many people was that?
We interviewed the park employees, his wife. We interviewed his kids.
Sir, how many-
Dozens.
Dozens?
Yes, ma'am.
So out of those dozens of people, not a single one of them told you that they saw Cara Bassett drug her husband.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't catch that. What did you say?
I'm sorry, sir. Out of the dozens of eyewitnesses that you spoke to, not a single one of them saw Cara Bassett drug her husband.
That's correct, ma'am.
Out of the dozens of eyewitnesses that you spoke to, not a single one of them said that they thought Cara Bassett had the strength to pick up her husband.
Ma'am, we spoke to lots of witnesses, associates of Mr. Clark in his businesses, but we didn't speak to any eyewitnesses.
Okay, but out of all the witnesses that you spoke to, nobody said Miss Bassett had the strength to lift her husband?
That's right.
And out of all of the dozens of witnesses that you spoke to, not a single one of them saw Miss Bassett put her husband in a swamp.
That's correct.
So if you didn't have eyewitnesses to corroborate that story, I want to talk about what Miss Bassett told you about what happened that day, okay?
Sure thing, ma'am.
Now, you spoke to Miss Bassett several times throughout the course of your investigation, right?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
And every time you wanted to ask her questions, she cooperated.
That's true.
Every time you wanted to ask Miss Bassett for evidence, she gave it right to you, right?
Yes, ma'am, she submitted to a search of her home and her phone, and we were able to search those properties and interview her.
To be clear, she handed that evidence right over to you. It's not like she tried to hide, right?
I'm not sure what you mean, ma'am. She let us search her home.
All right, so she opened her doors to you and let her look.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, every single time that you spoke to Miss Bassett, she told you the same story. right?
Yes, ma'am. We spoke to her about a number of different things. We didn't find inconsistencies between the story she told.
Right. Between the story she told, it stayed the same for a full year, yes?
Across our interviews, that's right.
But sir, you told us on direct examination that you found some evidence to contradict her story.
Yes, ma'am, we did.
But detective, the truth is, you didn't actually investigate a part of her story.
Sorry, you're going to have to be more specific, counsel.
I'd be happy to, detective. Miss Bassett told you that when her husband went missing, she went out looking for him, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
May I respond? Your Honor, we're actually not trying to prove that Miss Bassett actually did go out looking for her husband. We're not trying to offer this statement to prove that fact. We're actually offering it to attack the credibility of the officer and to impeach him. He said earlier that he found evidence to contradict her story. We're actually showing here that in his investigation, he didn't fully look into her story. So at this point, the statement is just being used to demonstrate that bad investigation.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. They're absolutely using that statement that Miss Bassett was searching for her husband for the truth of the matter. As the defense, they're claiming that Miss Bassett, of course, didn't murder her husband and was looking for him, you know, like a spouse would look for their husband. They're using that statement for the truth of the matter.
I'm going to overrule the objection at this point, but the government should, of course, renew its objection if you believe that counsel is, in fact, using the statement for the truth, either during this examination or subsequently during the trial.
Understood, Your Honor.
So detective, when you were talking to Miss Bassett, she told you that she went out looking for her husband, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's what she claimed.
She told you that she was looking for him at bars and casinos.
That's right.
Sir, she even gave you the names of the bars and casinos that she went to.
Yes, ma'am.
Detective, you didn't check her store, did you?
Well, ma'am, we went to those bars and casinos. We didn't find any evidence there.
Sir, you didn't actually check the bars and casinos, right?
Yes, ma'am, we did. We didn't find any evidence there.
Hold on, detective. It's your sworn testimony that the FBI checked the bars and casinos that Miss Bassett was telling you about?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Sir, you remember being present for the interview, the FBI interview of Cara Bassett, right?
Yes, ma'am, I was there. Miss Bassett, her attorney, and my fellow agent, Ben Garmo, asked the questions.
Sir, if I were to show you a transcript of that interview, you think you'd recognize it?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Let's take a look at that transcript, Mr. Hopcraft. And we're actually going to turn to page 5, line 1 of this transcript, Mr. Hopcraft. And detective, while Mr. Hopcraft's flipping through, you can see that this is fair and accurate, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
So I want to turn your attention to line 1 of page 5. Do you see it?
Yes, I'm taking a look at it.
All right, I'm going to read this statement out loud, and I'd like you to read along silently, okay?
Sure thing.
Cara Bassett, I gave you all the names of the places I went. Did you check? FBI. No. Detective, did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly, ma'am, but ma'am, this is our interview of her. And frankly, the investigative steps we took, they weren't her prerogative. We weren't going to tell her everything we were doing to investigate.
Oh, hold on, detective.
Sorry to interrupt, but I received a note that we've hit time. Is that correct? Is there have we run on a time limit here?
Yes, Your Honor. I think we're about 30 seconds over time already.
Does the defense agree or disagree about that?
Your Honor, we do.
You agree or you disagree?
We do agree, yes.
Okay, so that's time. So that will conclude this examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is there any redirect examination?
Just briefly, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Now, Agent, after you started investigating Miss Bassett, did you stop looking?
No, ma'am. Our investigation continued for a year's time until her arrest.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you, sir. You are dismissed. Is there anything further from the government?
Nothing further from us, Your Honor. We rest our case in chief.
Very good. Does the defense have a witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Oh, I didn't realize I was unmuted. At this time, the defense calls Joe Kwong to the stand.
Very good. And you may proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Kwong. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Jo Kwong.
And what do you do for a living, ma'am?
I'm a film producer here in Tallahassee. I've been doing that for about 7 years now.
You want to talk to us a little bit about how you got into the business?
Sure. It was actually my dad who really inspired me. When I was a kid, he actually was the weatherman at our local TV station. So he really pushed me to go into TV. Granted, I learned pretty quick that public speaking was not my forte. I had a little too much stage fright for that, so I like to work more behind the scenes now and really get behind the camera.
All right, Ms. Kwong, I want to turn your attention to your involvement in today's case. Have you ever filmed any documentaries with someone named Cara Bassett?
Yeah. My latest work called Elephant Queen, she was the star of it.
You say she was the star of your latest work. How long did you two film that documentary together?
For years. I've been working with Cara since 2015, when she first called me to her elephant park to kind of get a lay of the scene.
How often did you go to her elephant park to film?
Basically every day. I spent thousands of hours with her over the past years, really trying to get any footage that would work for the show.
All right, ma'am, I want to talk to you about some of the observations you made when you were there every day, thousands of hours for 3 years. Okay?
Sure.
Ms. Kwong, were you able to observe the relationship between Cara Bassett and her husband, John Clark?
Oh, definitely. I saw them interact all the time.
What was their relationship like?
Honestly, they were a really cute couple. They were both very eccentric people, don't get me wrong, but it was really clear that they cared about each other, even more than they cared about the elephants and all the work that they were doing.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Response.
Your Honor, this is not speculation. We've already laid all the foundation that this witness has ample knowledge to be able to talk about the relationship between Cara Bassett and her husband. Your Honor, she spent almost every day with these people for 3 years. All the foundation is there for her to make a 701 lay witness opinion.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm objecting specifically to the statement that it was clear that they cared about each other more than the elephants. Your Honor, that goes a step too far. She's not talking about something she observed, saw, or witnessed with her own senses. She's stepping into their mind frame to tell the jury how they truly felt about each other. That's the speculation that I'm objecting to, Your Honor.
And I agree that that's speculation. Objection sustained.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Granted.
Ms. Kwong, you said that you noticed that Cara Bassett and her husband had a really loving relationship. Did you ever see Cara Bassett physically hit her husband?
No, of course not.
Did she ever tell you that she wanted to hurt her husband?
No, she never did that.
Ma'am, I want to fast forward to August of 2017. Do you remember when Don Clark went missing?
I do. I was actually out of the country when it must have happened, but I saw Don Clark on August 18th before he left.
Now, after Don Clark went missing, did you see Miss Bassett?
I did. We kept doing the show, and I interacted with her a lot after we got the news.
During those interactions, did you ever film Miss Bassett?
I did, yes. We kept the show going.
And let's take a look at some of that footage. And Ms. Kwong, I'm not actually going to play this footage yet. I just want you to tell me if it looks fair and accurate from the footage that you got. And is it?
Yeah, this looks right. I believe this is from August 27th, so a little bit after he went missing.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers Exhibit 34 into evidence.
Objection.
Your Honor, I believe Exhibit 34 isn't one of the videos, unless I'm mistaken. Our list says the videos are from 35 to 48.
Excuse me, Your Honor, one moment. Excuse me, Your Honor, Exhibit 39.
Any objection to Exhibit 39?
Your Honor, no objection to this exhibit.
Okay, it's submitted.
Your Honor, may we go ahead and play it?
Of course.
My husband is gone. It's been more than a week. He hasn't called or texted or anything. I don't know where he's at, and I'm really worried about him.
Ms. Kwong, looking at this footage here, and based on your observations, how is Ms. Bassett acting after her husband went missing?
Honestly, she just fell apart. She was always such a strong and composed woman, but after Don went missing, she seemed really depressed. She was really scared, acted really confused. It was really hard to see her go through that much pain.
And Ms. Kwong, based on your observations, do you think that Cara Bassett was capable of killing her husband?
Definitely not. There's no way Cara had anything to do with this. She would never hurt Don.
Well, ma'am, if Cara Bassett, if you don't think she was capable, I want to talk to you about someone who might be capable. Have you ever met someone named Lisa Clark?
Unfortunately, yeah, Lisa Clark used to come around the elephant park every now and then. I'm always trying to find Don.
Now, when you saw Lisa, or who is Lisa Clark in relation to Don?
She was his ex-wife.
Now, when you saw Lisa come around the elephant park, how was she acting toward Don?
Really aggressive. I mean, she'd come in the park just screaming, threatening him, always trying to yell at him about something.
Your Honor, under Rule 404, this is improper character evidence. Would you like me to explain?
Please.
Your Honor, the defense in this case is alleging that Lisa Clark might be an alternate suspect who murdered Mr. Clark. They've been saying that since opening statements. Offering this testimony of her being aggressive towards him, threatening him, well, that's improper character evidence, as it's going to show a propensity for those character traits, aggression and violence.
Response?
Your Honor, the defense in this trial is not trying to prove anything. As Ms. Metha knows, we don't have a burden in this case. What we're doing here is attacking the police investigation. If you allow me a little leeway, I'm going to have the witness is going to talk about some of the behaviors that Lisa Clark was exhibiting leading up to Don Clark's disappearance. And then I'm going to ask her about the police investigation and see whether or not the police ever investigated Lisa Clark. So at this point, this information is not being used to show propensity. We're not trying to prove Lisa Clark did anything. We're simply trying to show that we don't know what Lisa Clark did because the police didn't investigate.
May I respond?
In a moment, but under Rule 404, what's your specific response to Rule 404? You're saying that this isn't Rule 404 evidence, or you're saying that this is 404B evidence?
We're not saying it's 404B evidence. We're just saying it's not 404 evidence at all because we're not trying to demonstrate any propensity.
Right, okay. Government?
Yes, Your Honor. First of all, if this evidence about Lisa Clark is going to be used to talk about the police investigation, well, that's only relevant if Lisa Clark was in fact the person who killed her husband. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what the police did related to Miss Clark. Your Honor, they're using this evidence to show that Miss Clark was aggressive in the past and therefore more likely to be aggressive on the day in question. Furthermore, Your Honor, if this evidence really is being used to attack the police investigation, they can't do this with this witness. This witness just isn't qualified to offer conclusions about the police's investigation.
Your Honor, a brief response based on that.
Very brief.
First of all, whether or not the police investigated an individual who was acting violently toward Don Clark leading up to his disappearance is relevant in this case. It demonstrates that they didn't investigate a potential alternative suspect.
So I generally agree with the defense that they're free to question the integrity of the investigation. I have concerns, though, about bringing up specific acts of aggression of another individual who the defense is arguing, understandably, you don't have a burden, but you're arguing that this person may have committed this act or may have been a person who should have been investigated. And I think that if you're saying that you're not offering that under 404B, then I'm troubled by admitting it. And so given the arguments, I'm going to sustain the objection and strike that. To the extent that there was testimony, I don't recall if there was, it's stricken. But certainly the defense is free to question the integrity of the investigation. I disagree with the government that you can't do that with this witness. You certainly can, but not using this evidence. So the objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ma'am, I want to talk about something that happened in September of 2017, or excuse me, in the summer of 2017 with Lisa Clark. Do you remember if she came by the park that summer?
Yes, she did a couple of times.
Ma'am, when she came by the park that summer, do you remember if she was saying anything to Don Clark?
I do. That summer, a little bit before Don went missing, she screamed that she would wipe him off the face of the earth.
Your Honor, at this time, I would renew my 404 objection to that specific statement.
Response?
Your Honor, a statement is not a character. A statement is demonstrating someone's intent. At this point, we actually are offering this evidence under 404B to demonstrate that Ms. Clark might have had the intent to hurt her husband.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor, this statement doesn't demonstrate a specific intent. It's a threat, just like this witness previously characterized it. They're using this statement as a character trait of aggression, that Ms. Clark was likely to get aggressive and violent and threaten her husband, and that's what she did in this case.
What about her argument that this is under 404B, shows her intent?
Yes, Your Honor, with a statement like this, where it's such a violent, aggressive statement, considering we're here today to discuss the murder of Mr. Clark, there's too high a likelihood that the jury takes this statement as propensity evidence. As we know, there's no witnesses who actually saw Ms. Clark have anything to do with this crime. So this previous aggressive act is likely, it's too high a chance that the jury takes that as propensity evidence in this case.
I think we can instruct the jury not to do so. And it sounds like something you could argue in closing argument or on cross-examination even. But given the argument, I'm going to overrule your objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Ms. Kwong, you were telling us about an incident that took place at Don Clark's park in the summer of 2017 with Lisa Clark. Do you remember what she said to Don Clark?
Yeah. She screamed at Don that she would wipe him off the face of the earth.
Ms. Kwong, did you observe the police investigation into the disappearance of Don Clark?
Yeah, I saw part of it. When they were at the elephant park and I was shooting, we saw a lot of what they were doing.
Ma'am, based on what you saw, did you ever see the police investigating Lisa Clark?
No, I never saw them ask about Lisa Clark or talk about her at all when they were at the park.
Ma'am, this woman who said she was going to wipe Don Clark off the face of the earth, did you ever hear the police say that they were going to look for her?
No, they never mentioned anything about Lisa Clark.
Thank you, Ms. Kwong. Your Honor, we have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Would the government like to cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. Hi, Ms. Kwong. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Oh, ma'am, you mentioned something on direct examination. You told us that you believed Miss Bassett was not capable of killing her husband. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. She really loved her husband. I can't think of any reason why she would try to hurt him like that.
Ma'am, I want to be clear about your relationship, the relationship that you have with the person you're saying that about. Now, Ms. Kwong,
sure.
You were hired by Miss Bassett, is that right?
Yeah, to shoot the documentary. We started back in 2015.
That's right, starting back in 2015, the defendant paid you $5,000 every month, is that right?
Yeah, for the film crew to come shoot the show.
Ma'am, you're still working on that documentary, aren't you?
That's correct. It should be out later this year.
And you know, it's possible that documentary sells for $20 million, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, ma'am, you have an agreement with the defendant about that documentary, don't you?
Yeah, we worked together a lot on it. So we've collabed on a lot of the different aspects of the work.
Well, specifically, the defendant's going to pay you 20% for that documentary, the profits. Is that right?
Yeah, once it's released, I'm entitled to 20% of what we get back from it.
Ma'am, if that deal goes through, you're going to gain millions of dollars. Is that right?
Well, that's certainly the hope.
Millions of dollars from the person you're testifying for here today?
I mean, they just asked me to come talk about what I saw and what I filmed, so.
Ma'am, you know you're testifying on behalf of the defendant, don't you?
Sure.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about Dawn and Cara's relationship. Like you just said, you think they're a loving couple. Is that right?
Yeah, they definitely were.
Ma'am, you've actually witnessed them fight before, right?
Yeah, about small stuff, sure.
They fought several times, right?
Yeah, over the several years I worked with them, I saw them get into a couple spouts.
I want to talk about some of those fights that happened in the summer that Mr. Clark went missing. Now, you know they would fight about the elephant sanctuary, is that right?
Yeah, they would occasionally fight about work stuff, specifically like what they wanted to do with the elephants, scheduling, that kind of thing.
Right, ma'am. Cara thought that the animals weren't being treated humanely enough.
Yeah, Cara was definitely more of an animal activist than Dawn was. She didn't really like that they were in cages occasionally, didn't like people being super close to the elephants, stuff Dawn didn't really care about as much.
Well, she said she wanted to turn that zoo into a sanctuary, is that right?
Yeah, she did, specifically for baby elephants.
Ma'am, you overheard a fight between the two of them one time in the summer of 2017, is that right?
Yeah, I did.
You remember that the defendant got angry during that fight?
Yeah, she really wanted to change it into a sanctuary.
Ma'am, you told us these fights were small. The defendant actually picked up a vase and threw it against the wall. Isn't that right?
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 404, this is improper character evidence. Ms. Mehta is trying to use the fact that Ms. Bassett acted violently before to prove that she acted violently in today's case.
Mons?
Yes, Your Honor. We're offering this evidence under Rule 404B2 as it goes to the defendant's motive. We're offering this evidence that she got so angry about these circumstances, the elephant park wanting it to be a sanctuary, she was willing to pick up a vase and throw it against a wall. And we're not offering this to show that she was violent towards Mr. Clark or towards anyone else.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Well, first, did you provide notice? Did the government provide notice to the defense of any intent to offer this evidence?
Your Honor, per the pretrial order, all notice requirements have been fulfilled in today's case.
Very good. Yes, you may respond, Ms. Campbell.
Well, Your Honor, the motive, according to the government, is that she wanted to start an elephant sanctuary. So if she's going to ask the witness questions about whether or not Ms. Bassett was passionate about elephants, that goes to motive. But asking her about a specific action where she acted violently toward Mr. Clark, that doesn't demonstrate a motive. The only reason why it would be how they could be using it is to show propensity evidence.
So how does this show motive?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, we're not offering this evidence. We're not suggesting that Ms. Bassett threw this vase directly at her husband. All I asked the witness, and she agreed, was that the vase got thrown against the wall. We're suggesting that these arguments were something that the defendant was so angry about, so passionate about, like Ms. Campbell just said, that she was willing to do this, break an object of hers, throw this vase against the wall. We're not using it to suggest that she had a trait for violence, that she had ever been violent to her husband in the past. That's not part of our case here today, Your Honor.
I know, but my question is, how does that demonstrate motive?
Yes, Your Honor, it's our belief that her motive in today's case was that she wanted control over the elephant sanctuary, over her husband's property. This angry thing that she did, breaking this object in the middle of a fight about that very thing, about that elephant sanctuary, goes towards her motive in today's case.
I see. I think this one's very close, but I will overrule the objection. The government can continue its questions.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Kwong, you saw the defendant pick up a vase and throw it against the wall. Is that right?
Yeah, during the argument, she threw it against the wall and it shattered.
To be clear, ma'am, that fight happened sometime in the summer, the same year Mr. Clark went missing. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's right.
Ms. Kwong, on direct examination, Ms. Campbell asked you some questions about someone named Lisa Clark. Is that right?
Yeah, about Don's ex-wife.
I want to talk a little bit more specifically about her, specifically what she did after, after Mr. Clark went missing. Now, ma'am, you've seen both Don and Cara's phone records, haven't you?
Yeah, when I was actually doing an interview for 64 minutes, they showed me some records that they got from the government. That was the first time I'd ever seen them.
Mr. Castleberry, could we put those on the screen? And Your Honor, these exhibits 21, 22 have both been pre-admitted. Now, ma'am, you know that Lisa Clark called Don Clark on August 20th, right?
Yep, that's what the records say.
Days after he disappeared, right?
Yep, that looks right.
She called him again on the 23rd, right?
Yep, that's what the record said.
And then she texted him, right?
Yep, that looks right.
She said, "Why are you avoiding my calls?"
Yes.
Ma'am, you know that she also she also texted Miss Bassett, right?
Yes, that looks right.
She texted Miss Bassett to say, "Please tell your husband to call me back," right?
Yeah, it looks like it says, "Please ask our husband to call me back."
And that was after Mr. Clark had already disappeared, after August 17th. Is that right?
Yes, looks like that was on the 24th of August.
Ms. Kwong, I want to compare that to what the defendant did after Mr. Clark disappeared. Now, on direct examination, you and Ms. Campbell, you played a video of the defendant after Mr. Clark disappeared. Is that right?
Yeah, from the documentary.
In that video, the defendant said, "I don't know where he is. He hasn't called or texted," right?
Yes, she did.
Ma'am, like we just talked about, you've seen Miss Bassett's phone records.
Yeah, I did.
You know that Miss Bassett never called her husband, right?
No, doesn't look like they had any communications after the 18th.
She never texted her husband after the 18th, right?
No.
Ma'am, you see here, she made 3 calls to a soup store, right?
Yep.
But she never called or texted you to ask for help finding her husband?
No, I was actually in Mexico that week. I didn't get back until like a week after the 18th, so she didn't talk to me when I was on vacation.
Ms. Kwong, you can see from these records, she didn't call any friends or family asking for help finding her husband. Isn't that right?
That's right. Looks like she just called the soup place and the police.
Thank you, ma'am. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Very good, thank you. Is there a redirect examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Kwong, Ms. Method just asked you some questions that Ms. Bassett was about her elephant zoo. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Ms. Kwong, did Ms. Bassett ever tell you that she was willing to hurt her husband to get a zoo?
No, of course not. Everything she said about Don was always really positive. They had a really good relationship.
Did she ever tell you that she wanted to kill her husband to get some money?
No, of course not.
Sir, did she ever, or excuse me, ma'am, did she ever tell you she wanted to wipe her husband off the face of the earth?
No, the only person who made those kind of threats towards Don was his ex-wife, Lisa.
Thank you, Ms. Kwong. Nothing further.
Thank you. Anything further from the government?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. You're dismissed. Anything further from the defendant?
None, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests our case in chief.
Very good. We will now hear closing arguments from either party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view. Also, since the witnesses have both completed their testimony, the scoring judges should complete the witness portion of their ballots. And when the government is ready, you may begin your closing argument.
May it please the court? She planned, she poisoned, she profited. Members of the jury, I want to start by taking a step back and reminding you what's at the center of this case. We're here today because of Don Clark. There was a fact earlier in today's case, so fast you might have missed it, but Agent Johnson told us that when Mr. Clark died, he left behind 2 children. Mr. Clark never got to see those kids grow old. He never got to see the birth of his grandchildren. He's missed countless birthdays and weddings and anniversaries. We can't bring Mr. Clark back. But in a court of law, there is one thing we can do. We can bring his children justice. And we can do that by holding his murderer accountable. See, that's why we charged the defendant, Miss Bassett, with murder. It was our job to prove to you, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Miss Bassett intentionally killed Mr. Clark. Members of the jury, we met that burden today by showing you that the defendant planned for this crime. She poisoned her husband and walked away with a profit. Now, I'm going to take you through each part of that case. First, you heard about the plan. The defense's own witness, Miss Kwong, testified. She told you she had seen Mr. Clark and Miss Bassett fighting on a number of occasions. The defendant didn't like how Mr. Clark was running his businesses and his properties. So she had the family attorney write something very specific into their power of attorney document. She asked for a clause stating that if Mr. Clark were to disappear, Miss Bassett would get everything. Control over all those properties, all the money, all the businesses, that elephant sanctuary. Members of the jury, with that plan in place, we learned how she poisoned her husband. See, today you heard about this dangerous chemical that's kept at that elephant park where they both lived. You learned that just drops of it can be lethal, that this drug is 5,000 times more toxic than heroin is. Members of the jury, the police officers asked, did the defendant know this? Did she know how dangerous this could be for human beings? In response, she laughed. Members of the jury, it's not a coincidence that a careful log was kept tracking how much of this drug was on the property, and how the log said there should be 24 vials, but that the police officers only found 23. After poisoning her husband, the defendant knew she couldn't get caught, as she had to cover her tracks. So she used that wheelchair, drove her husband's body to the swamp 100 miles away, dumped his body in this swamp, and left. And members of the jury, we know that's what happened because we showed you the GPS evidence showing you exactly where the van went that night. We know the same mud that was at that big gum swamp was the same mud that was in the van, was the same mud that was on the defendant's shoes. And members of the jury, if you have any doubt at all left that the defendant is the person who committed this crime, all you have to do is look at what she did after Mr. Clark went missing. I just want you to think for a second about what a person really would do if they were in this situation. If a loved one, a child, a spouse really did go missing, would they call them? Would they text them? Would they leave voicemails? Would they call their family and friends, seeing if anyone had seen them? Or would they call the police? Would they ask anyone for help? Members of the jury, the defendant didn't do any of those things. No, you heard today that she made more calls to a soup store than she did to her own husband in the week that she claimed her husband went missing. Members of the jury, the defendant didn't call her husband because she knew he wouldn't answer. She didn't text to see where he was because she knew exactly where he was. She didn't ask if he was okay because she knew he wasn't. But the defense tried to tell you a very different story today. They told you about somebody named Lisa Clark. And members of the jury, everybody here agrees. Lisa Clark and Don Clark didn't like each other very much. They were going through a nasty, bitter divorce. Members of the jury, think about what Miss Clark did after Mr. Clark went missing. You heard she called him twice. She texted him. She even texted the defendant to say, hey, our husband's not calling me back. Tell him to do that. Lisa Clark may not have liked Mr. Clark, but she was legitimately trying to find him that week. And think about it. If Miss Clark really had committed this murder, why would she text Miss Bassett, his family member, to let her know that Mr. Clark was missing? Members of the jury, that's not a reasonable explanation of the facts. That's a story of a defendant desperate to stay out of prison. Plan, poison, profit. That's murder, members of the jury. And we all want to believe that a wife wouldn't kill her husband over something like a business. We all want to believe that a wife couldn't commit such a heinous crime against her own husband. Members of the jury, today's case just isn't about what we want to believe to be true. It's not about what we want to believe happened, it's about what did happen. And what happened is this. She planned, she poisoned, she profited. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. 21. That's how many times Miss Metha referred to the murder weapon in this case. And isn't that something, members of the jury? That in an hour-long trial with 2 witnesses, several pieces of exhibits, and then 21 mentions of this murder weapon, that Miss Metha could never even show you the murder weapon. Isn't that something, folks? That you just sat through a 1-hour murder trial and Miss Metha couldn't show you the dead body. And isn't that something, folks? That Miss Metha just told you that the information the defense provided is a story when they don't even have an eyewitness to support their case. Well, the reason why there's all these holes, the reason why they're missing all of this evidence is because they didn't go looking for it. Because when the government found someone to blame, they stopped looking. That's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. Because it's not the government's job to find just any old person to blame for what happened. No, it's their job to find the right person. And today in court, it was their job to prove their case beyond all reasonable doubt. Prove their case so that you're not wondering what happened to the murder weapon. Prove their case so that you're not wondering where the eyewitness is. Prove their case so that you are convinced that a murder ever took place. They didn't meet their burden. Frankly, folks, they didn't really come close. I mean, just think for a second about what the government's theory is in this case. It's their theory that Cara Bassett picked up her husband and put him in a wheelchair, picked up her husband, put him in a car, picked up her husband, threw him in a swamp. Members of the jury, here's the problem. Cara Bassett was 5'4". She was this tall. And you didn't hear any evidence that she's some sort of, expert power lifter. So members of the jury, that story doesn't really make any sense. In fact, we know it doesn't make any sense because we know that there are more things that the government is missing. During this trial, I told you to look out for those things. During opening statement, I said to look out for the key evidence that they were missing. Ladies and gentlemen, what'd you find? You found that they don't have a body to prove that this was a murder. You found that they don't have a weapon, and to the extent that there isn't a weapon, they can't tie Miss Bassett to it. And you found that the FBI in this case spoke to dozens and dozens of witnesses to figure out what happened. They didn't find a single person who said they saw Miss Bassett do anything that they're claiming. That's the story. So if they have no evidence to support their story, what about Miss Bassett's? Well, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Bassett actually told the FBI her story. She told the FBI, I went looking for my husband. I went out, I went to bars, I went to casinos. But the police, and you know this happened because we actually had an opportunity to look at the interrogation and trial today. The police didn't check her story, folks. They just didn't look. We don't know why they didn't look. Miss Meta gets up here and says, well, we know that she didn't look for her husband because she didn't call him. Why didn't they go to the casinos and see if she looked there? Why didn't they go to the bars and see if she looked there? Ladies and gentlemen, she gave them the specific names of the bars. They didn't look. So who should they have been really looking for in this case? Well, we called a witness named Jo Kwong to talk about her knowledge of this case. She told you all that she knew about someone who might have had it out for Don Clark. Knew about someone who was constantly going to Don Clark's home. Miss Metha even showed you during her opening, this is a person who was blowing up Don Clark's phone, texting and calling. She wants you to think, oh, that means she cares. Maybe that means that she's out to get him. Ladies and gentlemen, that person is not Cara Bassett. It's Lisa Clark. And for the government's entire direct examination, they couldn't tell you anything about what happened with Lisa Clark. They don't have an alibi with Lisa Clark. They don't know what she was doing when they think that Cara Bassett was ousting her husband into a swamp. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason they're missing this evidence, the reason that they can't tell you what happened, they didn't confirm Miss Bassett's story, and the reason that we have no information about Lisa Clark is because the government had already found someone to blame. Miss Bassett. And when they found someone to blame, they stopped looking. Members of the jury, Ms. Metha's about to come up here and talk to you one more time about her case. And we ask that when she does, you keep looking. Keep looking to see if there's eyewitnesses. Keep looking to see if there's a weapon. Keep looking to see if there's a body. Keep looking. We anticipate you'll find that Ms. Bassett is not guilty for this crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the government have a rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Members of the jury, it's not just one piece of evidence pointing to the defendant in today's case. It's all of it. But the defense would have you believe none of it. You heard that mud from the swamp was on the defendant's shoes. Well, they say that's wrong. You heard that the defendant didn't call the police or her husband for an entire week. Well, they say that's just a mistake. No, she was. We know that a vial of that deadly poison was missing from the site. They're telling you that's just a coincidence. Members of the jury, those aren't lies or mistakes or coincidences. Those are the facts of what happened in today's case, the evidence. So you know to find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Judges should now please complete their ballots and then click submit. I will ask everyone to stay on the call so that we can do comments briefly, but also so that we can make sure all the ballots have been submitted. So I'll just wait until we get the green light that all the ballots are in.